despite the loss of Donald Trump during Election Day, in a way that is pretty definitive, the American people sent a message saying, we don't want Donald Trump messing with healthcare. We would actually prefer, as a lot of exit poll shows or exit poll show, that this was taken during the election, by the way. 72% of Americans support a Medicare for all type of single payer system that is government run sponsored healthcare. That said, the ACA is clearly not government run and sponsored healthcare, but nonetheless, it is a step towards that system. And as such, most Americans do not want the administration to get rid of it. That said, that's exactly what the administration is trying to do. They're actually making their last try in the U.S. Supreme Court to end Obamacare. Now, that, of course, could cancel the health care of millions of Americans in the midst of a pandemic. That's not a good situation. As not a fan of the ACA I am, it's still better than nothing. And why would you want to take away health insurance in the middle of a pandemic unless you're, of course, trying to kill people? It's ridiculous. Now, this case is appropriately named California versus Texas because, of course, it's the most American thing ever. And what's happened is that actually this case has been going on for quite some time. And it just happens to be now, right after the election, that it ends up going to the Supreme Court. Right now, they're currently making closing arguments in favor of the ACA. And so now this has bounced around the lower courts for some time. And what's at the heart of it is basically the individual mandate. Now, the individual mandate, you all know, is both simultaneously the most unpopular thing about the law, but also was necessary for the law to work as intended, as to not, of course, set up what we call a death spiral. So what it is that you charge a tax, basically, or a penalty that's added to your tax bill for people not buying insurance. Now, look, again, you guys know I believe in Medicare for all. I think the system that the ACA sets up is half-hearted and a bit ridiculous. And overly complicated and overly weighted in favor of corporations, of insurance companies. That's why I want to have a single-payer, government-sponsored insurance, like Medicare for All, which, again, is incredibly comprehensive and is cheaper than what we have now. Everybody gets insurance at birth. Nobody can get discriminated against for pre-existing conditions. Everybody gets insurance. Everybody gets healthcare free at the point of service. Okay, that said, the ACA does not work that way. All right, if you can't afford insurance, but you still make too much to get Medicaid, then you are charged a penalty on your taxes. And the penalty, and those are the people that are unfortunately hurt by the ACA. Now, most people get their insurance through work. I am an independent contractor, so people like me do not have that luxury of being able to get their insurance through work. That's why I'm currently uninsured, because it is too expensive, and yet I make too much money to get state benefits. And so people like me were charged the ACA penalty, right? Since, again, we can't afford insurance. And actually taking that penalty was less expensive than getting insurance throughout the year, at least for somebody who is healthy. And again, I understand the whole point of insurance is what if something happens? So it's one of those things. And a lot of people, I'm going to guess they also took the same kind of gamble that they were going to be healthy, that nothing was going to happen to them, to avoid the just insanely expensive private insurance, even if it was subsidized by the markets. That said, that that penalty for not having insurance on your taxes is incredibly relevant. That is at the heart of this case today. So what happened back in 2012, and this was challenged twice in Supreme Court, the Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision with the liberal justices, with Roberts being the swing vote, he said that the individual mandate would be ruled as a tax. And so what the Republicans did is they questioned the constitutionality of that law, specifically hinging on the individual mandate and whether or not they can basically tax people or charge people a penalty for not buying a private good, right? which is insurance. Well, since it was ruled to be a tax, it allows the government to be able to do that. And that's the way it was ruled back in 2012. That is actually what saved the AC-8 from getting thrown out in court in the first place. Now, in 2017, since they failed again to get rid of the ACA through Congress, the famous John McCain thumbs down, well, they decided to take the individual mandate and basically zero it out. So you take it from, I believe it was a certain percentage of your income or $700. And it might have been for like the first couple of years, and then it gradually increased. They decided to take that and say, no, we're just going to go zero it out. We're done. We're done. Okay. Now that said, when they did that, they opened up another avenue to go and remove the law, to eliminate the law. Okay. And so they say that, well, I mean, since the penalty is zero now, well, then you can't look at it as a tax. That's kind of a ridiculous argument because, well, I mean, just because it's zeroed out doesn't mean it cannot be considered to be a tax. I mean, look, it's a tax, even though Jeff Bezos doesn't pay it, it's still technically a tax. It's just that somehow through his loopholes, through his tricksy accounting, he doesn't have to pay it, right? In this case, Congress basically said, no, we're going to just lower it down to nothing, even though it's still a tax, even though we couldn't get rid of it. We're just going to make it negligible, a 0% tax. Okay, so now they argue now that, well, we don't think it's a tax anymore because it's nothing. Well, that means the 5-4 decision that was made by John Roberts as a swing vote and the liberals in the court, well, that doesn't apply anymore. So we should just throw out the whole ACA because the one thing that was keeping it in place, I'm no longer considering that a tax. In fact, Texas argues, quote, the ACA contains an unconstitutional command that can no longer be saved as a tax. So, but hold on here. Again, it's still a tax. It's just $0. And you can actually change that to, what if you put it as $1? Then it could still be considered a tax. And the ability for them to be able to change it up and down means that they're still able to use it as a tax. They can just change the amount. And so it seems like a pretty ridiculous argument. Now, 18 states, however, disagree. They say that, well, since it's zero, it's not a tax, and we should just throw out the whole law. Understand, this is complicated. This is like pretzel-ass logic, okay? From what I understand, though, about court cases, and I'm not a lawyer, but I understand that if you're going to bring a lawsuit against something, you have to have some sort of standing, right? So now you could say, look, and this is what the 2012 case was on. Okay, I'm getting charged this money, this penalty for not buying a private good. Well, I'm being hurt by this financially. I shouldn't have to pay this. I shouldn't be forced to buy a private good, right? If I don't want to, and that's what it lynched in. That was the linchpin of this entire case. Well, now the individual mandate is $0. What standing do you have? How are you hurt financially by paying nothing? You don't have standing. You don't have standing. And so it feels like that this is just another desperate shot in the dark in order to get rid of Obamacare, in order to stick it to both Obama and Biden, especially when they don't have anything to replace it. The Republicans literally do not have a plan to replace this. Donald Trump's executive orders on pre-existing conditions are both toothless and not comprehensive. And so it really wouldn't be much of a replacement to the flawed ACA that we have now. And so now there's the other thing that goes against the Republican case. And that's the fact that Congress did intend for the law to continue even without a penalty. Now, look, functionally, and understand that the court standard is that Congress's intent is the most important consideration for the court when deciding whether a law can be severed from something that may be considered unconstitutional, which would be that individual mandate. So, can the law exist without the individual mandate? Well, yes and no. So, here's what I'm looking at, okay? So, now the law was designed with an individual mandate in order to allow insurance prices to stay low. Now, obviously, that doesn't necessarily work because insurance can, since they have the ability to raise their rates anytime without price controls, they can just go, I don't care about your mandate. I'm still going to raise prices because I want to make more profit. All right. And plus, since we're getting subsidized by the government, we're just going to end up taking more government money, more taxpayer money. And so we're going to get fat and rich off this. So that's one of my main problems with the ACA is that it's just a giant corporate giveaway. But the problem is when you don't have the mandate, at least this is what proponents of the ACA are arguing, is that, well, without the mandate, they're going to raise prices even more. And so it's going to get to a point of where it's basically unaffordable, which it already is. It's unaffordable for people, and it brings us into a bit of a death spiral where healthy people without that mandate will choose not to do that since they're not fined. They're not given this, and using fine is kind of like a misnomer here. It's, again, considered to be a tax penalty. If they're not going to, get insurance and would rather pay that penalty, well, then you're going to cause a situation where only older and sick people, because they need that health insurance and health care, will be able to get insurance, and that will inevitably price some of them out of the system. And so that's what that whole death spiral is. And so policy-wise, that's a terrible policy because you can have a system that's unaffordable for the vast majority of Americans and also companies for as well. Because a lot of companies, they have to scale back on how much they spend on health insurance because especially if you're a small business, you can't necessarily afford to insure your employees. Again, that's why where a Medicare for All system would actually be incredibly beneficial because it takes the onus off of small business as well as off of individuals. And so that's a bit of a problem here, okay? And so nonetheless, that's policy-wise. Constitutionally, that's the other situation here. And again, I'm not a constitutional law scholar, nor am I a lawyer or anything like that. But from what it seems is that the Republicans can't seem to make a case that you can't just separate that out and have the ACA exist without the individual mandate. Again, functionally, it works better if you have a mandate, even though it's super, super unpopular, functionally. But the law can exist without it because what it is, basically the ACA is just a set of setting up insurance exchanges and giving subsidies to insurance companies. And the whole point of the mandate was, again, an attempt to keep prices lower. And so I would say with that in mind, functionally, yes, it's going to be harder for the law to actually function without the individual mandate, but constitutionally, it doesn't seem to run afoul. Again, from my understanding of this. And so it does seem like a bit of a long shot based on, again, precedents from the intent of Congress, again, was to allow this to be able to continue without that mandate. So again, super long shot, right? But again, there's two different conversations, as I was pointing out. All right. So that said, the good news here is, as the Washington Post reports, this is a super weak challenge. Advocates across the ideological spectrum, even those who opposed the Affordable Care Act in the past, say that this is the law's weakest challenge and that the court will have to agree to 3 different issues in order to reach Trump's goal of eliminating the Affordable Care Act. One of them, actually, here are the 3 questions, and I pretty much addressed all of these, but basically boiled down, do the challengers have legal standing? Do these 18 states plus 2 individuals that filed the suit, do you have standing? Now, I would say, again, no, because you're not paying anything into the individual mandate because it's been zeroed out by Congress. So you have no standing. You can't really argue that this law has harmed you. All right. The second, right, was, did the changes made by Congress in 2017 render unconstitutional the ACA's requirement for individuals to buy insurance? I mean, I would say, again, it's still there. The mandate is there. It's just $0. Legally, it didn't remove the requirement, and it didn't render it unconstitutional. It just made it so that people didn't have to pay it. So on a legal framework, on a legal basis, it doesn't seem to have really done anything. If anything, they basically just zeroed out one of the most unpopular parts of the law so that people are like, oh, well, I mean, I can get insurance or I cannot get insurance, and I don't have to pay a penalty. Well, that was my main bitch with this law to begin with, so I guess I'm okay with the rest of it. I mean, I really like that my kids can stay on their insurance until they're 26, and I really like the protections for pre-existing conditions, so I guess I'm more in favor of the law. Thanks, Congress. And then the other part of, again, is could the law be separated out or not? And if it's not, can we just chuck out the whole law? And that's what they're trying to argue. And as I understand, that case is focusing on the last question. Can you actually separate this thing out? We're going to have to see if they can do that. Again, my personal preference here is Medicare for all. But we don't live in that world. Bernie Sanders didn't win. We have a Congress that is wholly bought by pharmaceutical companies and health insurance corporations who give millions and millions of dollars to politicians in order to block things like Medicare for all. We have Joe Biden, who basically is putting forward a public option once he gets sworn in. And I don't even know if that's in the first 100 days. I don't know if that's part of the plan. I don't really trust that he's going to make that big of a change to the ACA. And so the other question is the Supreme Court. And this is really the issue. Even though it is a super weak challenge, we're going to see whether or not the Supreme Court, now with a 60 conservative supermajority, is this going to be a group full of activist partisan judges who will rule against the ACA because they're conservative and hate the ACA? Or are they going to actually look at the constitutionality of the argument and the weaknesses and strengths of the argument? But again, as I've laid out, it seems like a Hail Mary super weak argument. And so if the court does rule against the ACA and rules to have it unconstitutional and does not allow the separation of the mandate from the rest of the law, then we'll know exactly what kind of court we're dealing with. We'll know that they are indeed 100% without a doubt activist conservative judges. And well, if we know that, if that happens, well, then we'll know what to do in the future. And that's stack the goddamn court. Pack it full, because we cannot trust the court to make any sort of fair rulings. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share with your friends. You can subscribe and help out the channel by becoming a patron. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, or you can become a channel member as well by hitting the join button below.